They didn't disappear. They chose to be forgotten. A discovery that will shake everything you thought you knew. They arrived in silence. The HFY Warden, hull scorched from 1,000 atmospheric entries, drifted into the gravitational halo of the rift. There were no stars here, no comm signals, no echoes, just the curve of deep space bending inwards like the surface of an unseen lens. Beyond that, Helion 9. 3,000 people had vanished inside that station in 2253. Since then, 68 years had passed, and Helion 9 remained listed as non-operational due to total loss. A lie, perhaps, or a mercy. No vessel, military or otherwise, had returned until now. Inside the cockpit, Elyra Sorn sat upright, eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Her black hair was tied in a tight knot, strands coiling at the nape of her neck. The scanner unit in her right hand blinked steadily, reflecting against her amber-colored irises. "So this is it," she murmured. "The place history deleted." Behind her, Riven Kale remained silent. His figure, tall and lean, leaned against the inner bulkhead. The scar across his left jaw caught the faint light of the console, giving his otherwise blank expression the impression of fracture. His military rank patches had been burned off, intentionally. Only the faded outlines remained, a ghost of allegiance past. "Your father died for this place," Riven said flatly. "Are you sure you want to see it?" She didn't look at him. He didn't die. He was erased. There was no reply, but Riven's eyes remained on her, scanning not for weapons or betrayal, but hesitation. He had been trained to read people like maps. Elyra was a maze. The rift began to distort visibly as the Warden passed the outer perimeter zone. Lights on the console flickered. Time itself seemed uncertain here. The chrono read 1348, then 1347, then blank, then 1349. "Temporal shear increasing," Elyra noted, "just like the briefing said." "There were no briefings," Riven replied, "only warnings." And yet they came. The Warden, retrofitted for uncharted space, illegal in every system but still functional, was the only vessel stubborn or forgotten enough to reach this far. It was more coffin than cruiser, no weaponry, no crew, just two passengers and a truth buried under decades of silence. Riven approached the forward window. In the distance beyond the warping field, Helion 9 flickered into view. But it was not a wreck. It hung there in the dark like a cathedral caught in mid-breath. Massive spires stretched in impossible geometries. Outer modules rotated in opposing directions. The surface shimmered. No metal, no glass, just refracted nothingness. As though it was not being seen, but remembered. "This isn't a station," Elyra whispered. "It's a monument." "No," Riven corrected, voice low. "It's a refusal." The scanner buzzed briefly, then shut off. No life signs, no power grid, no automated distress, nothing. And yet from the edge of the cockpit glass, both of them felt something watching, as if the station were alive, not biologically, but philosophically, a presence of intention. "There's no welcome beacon," Elyra said, her voice barely above the hum of the ship. "No response codes." "That's the point," Riven muttered. His hands clenched unconsciously. He had been here before, 20 years ago, as part of a unit that came with orders to breach. He remembered standing at the rift's edge then, feeling that same sensation in his spine, the feeling that some part of time was looking back. Elyra turned to him now, brows slightly furrowed. "You know more than you're saying." He met her gaze. No denial, no affirmation. "I'm here to keep you alive," he said simply. "The rest is unnecessary." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She returned her attention to the console, fingers tightening around the scanner. A flicker pulsed across the view screen. Helion 9 shifted again. This time, part of the structure turned on its own axis. No propulsion, no momentum, just movement, as if reacting. The Warden's external temperature gauge spiked, though there was no nearby heat source. Light twisted outside the hull, filtering in strange hues. Violet, amber, crimson, all refracted like memory through a prism. "Temporal lensing at the station perimeter," Elyra noted. "It's not just orbiting out of sync, it's anchored in a broken flow." A temporal veil, Riven said under his breath, built on purpose. Her breath caught. To hide, to preserve. They looked at one another, not as soldier and civilian, not as escort and objective, but as two exiles staring into a place the universe was never meant to revisit. She straightened her shoulders. Bring us in. No turning back, Riven warned. There never was. The Warden shifted course, forward, into the veil, toward a past no one had permission to remember. The air inside Helion 9 was still. Too still. When the hatch of the Warden hissed open and Elyra stepped onto the docking platform, a faint hum pulsed through the metal beneath her boots. Not the hum of power, something older, residual, echoes of systems long since deactivated but never decayed. She swept her scanner in a slow arc. No active life forms, no electromagnetic fluctuations. The systems were off, not failed, not damaged, off by design. Riven followed 3 steps behind, rifle slung loosely across his chest, though the safety was still on. His breath was steady, too steady. He had walked through dead stations before, but none like this. This one didn't feel dead. It felt withheld. There was no breach, Elyra noted, running her fingers along the wall's seamless paneling. No sign of panic. This was deliberate. No blood, no struggle, not even dust, Riven added. It's like someone cleaned the crime scene before the crime happened. Elyra's brow furrowed. The interior architecture was stark, clean, minimalist, cold. But as they moved through the main corridor, a strange tension built within her chest. Every step forward felt like revisiting something left half forgotten. The lights overhead did not flicker. They remained off. Yet visibility was oddly clear, lit by the ambient glow from the rift outside, filtered through the translucent dome that curved over the central atrium. Who turned all this off so cleanly, she asked, more to herself than to Riven. They wanted no interference, no accidental discovery, no automated protocols sending pings, he replied. They didn't shut the lights off because they lost power. They did it to disappear. She paused at a junction. To the right, a staircase curved downward into darkness. To the left, a sealed bulkhead. She chose neither. Instead, she turned her head slowly, staring at the walls. They were lined with vertical slits, hidden conduits perhaps, but one, a single panel, seemed out of place. Her fingers traced its edge. The scanner blinked green. Access granted. Sorn. Elyra. Authorization level. Primary scifi. Elyra froze. What the hell? Riven muttered behind her, stepping forward. I've never been here before, she whispered. I've never. This should be impossible. The door hissed open. Inside was a data archive room, lined with sealed vaults and recessed holographic interfaces. Most units were cold, dead, but one in the far wall pulsed gently, waiting. A faint shimmer in the dustless air led her to it. Your biometrics open that, Riven said, his voice unreadable. Either someone gave you access, or you were always meant to come back. Elyra's hands trembled as she placed them on the console. Her skin recognized the pad like memory greeting memory. The room lit. Suddenly her breath caught. Across the far end, mounted into the wall like a shrine, was a retrospection unit, an archaic device known as a neuroecho. Once banned by most Terran councils for ethical concerns, it recorded the consciousness state of a person and allowed playback through interactive projection. It required complex tethering, constant upkeep, and yet it was still humming, still alive. How has this thing survived 68 years of isolation? Elyra asked, approaching slowly. Riven stayed back. Helion tech was always ahead, or unburdened by approval boards. Elyra reached for the activation pad, a soft tone. Then the interface glowed, static, then voice, a voice she hadn't heard in 20 years. If you're hearing this, then you're not lost. You came back, or maybe you never truly left. Her knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the edge of the console, eyes wide, breath shallow. It was him, Elyra Sorn, the man every Terran database labeled traitor, seditious, terminated, her father. The lights were not turned off in fear. They were turned off in peace, Because for once we found silence worth preserving. Elyra swallowed hard. The voice wasn't degraded. It wasn't distorted. It was calm, certain, unapologetic. "He's not leaving a warning," she whispered. "He's leaving a message." Riven stepped forward finally, face tense but unreadable. "You all planned this. Decades ago." "I didn't," she said. He tilted his head. "I don't remember." They both turned to look at the neuro-echo. It continued playing. "This is not abandonment. This is liberation. And some things must die in the minds of others to survive in the hearts of those who remain." No more static, only silence. Elyra's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She stood there in the dark, her breath slow. Not grief, not relief, recognition. The voice returned as Elyra activated the next sequence of the neuro-echo. This time the tone was steadier, more personal, not a warning, but a confession. Elyra Sorn's likeness flickered into view. Uniform intact, eyes clear, shoulders still squared, with that stoic authority she remembered from blurred childhood dreams. "I was once a servant of the Terran Unified Command," he began. "I believed in order, in preservation, in chain of command obedience, until I saw what that obedience demanded." His voice did not tremble. The log dated back to 2252, less than a year before Helion 9 vanished from all records. The war wasn't about territory, it was about ideology. Alliances turned to factions, factions to purges. What they asked of me wasn't defense, it was erasure. Elyra watched, stunned. Her father hadn't lost faith in humanity. He had lost faith in its structures. "I chose to step away, not out of cowardice, but as resistance. The only kind left." Elyra leaned closer. There was no madness in his eyes, only clarity. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because it sees too far ahead. Her breath caught when he said, "We had a choice. Either become another instrument in a cycle of retaliation or disappear on our own terms." He looked off screen briefly, then added, "History only remembers victors. We chose to be forgotten instead." The scene shifted. Data files unraveled themselves in front of her, a record of Helion's self-transformation. No more rank insignias, no currency, no authoritarian systems. Instead, they formed a council of equal votes, rotated every 10 cycles. Resource distribution was automated through mutual labor pools. There were no schools in the traditional sense. Children learned by observing, by participation, by choice. "Without written history," Callan's voice resumed, "we stopped being beholden to the mistakes of others. Memory became sacred, personal, voluntary." Elyra found a record showing that every citizen of Helion had the right to delete their identity from the community database, and many did. Not out of shame, but freedom. "We didn't abandon humanity," Callan said. "We redefined it." Something inside Elyra stirred. Not logic, memory. A glimpse of sunlight in an artificial dome. The sound of a song sung by many voices. The feeling of small fingers gripping a man's palm. She staggered back. These weren't just logs, she was in them. Half hidden, half redacted. She accessed another clip, and there she was. A little girl playing beside a bioluminescent pond while Callan knelt beside her, whispering words inaudible. Why would this be stored, then buried under secondary access? Who chose to hide it? And why was it returning now? "Someone took me out of here," she muttered, "but not to protect me, to make me forget." Riven, standing nearby, remained silent, watching, always watching. Elyra clenched her fists. The truth was not just buried in the systems, it was buried inside her. And someone, had gone to great lengths to keep it there. The station pulsed with silence as Riven adjusted his wristband chronometer, frowning. "This isn't drift," he muttered. "Time here is thicker." Elyra looked up from the console she had just failed to access. "Define thicker." He tapped the chrono again. "The station's internal temporal flow is operating at a reduced velocity. Approximately 1 unit of local time here equals about 7.3 units in standard time outside." She blinked. "So for every hour we spend here, nearly a third of a day passes beyond the rift." Riven nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the walls around them. "Deliberate, controlled. The implications began to unfold in Elyra's mind. This wasn't a malfunction. It was intentional. They slowed their own time, she whispered, to remain untouched. Riven's voice grew quieter. Or to make sure the outside world outpaced them. History would move on. Forget them naturally. A self-imposed obsolescence. Preservation by disappearance. They moved deeper into Helion 9's residential sectors. The living quarters were pristine, not abandoned in haste, but left behind with reverence. Dining tables were set, beds were made, child-sized drawings still clung to metallic walls with faded magnetic tabs. Water still flowed in communal sinks, filtered, warm. Nothing was broken, nothing decayed. It was as if the people had stepped out for an afternoon walk and never returned. No bones, no signs of collapse, no biological residue. Elyra found a closet with neatly folded clothes and labeled bins of personal effects, keepsakes, journals, trinkets. A community had thrived here, had built routine, safety, life. But now, nothing. She opened a door to a classroom, if it could be called that. The walls were filled with holographic poems, mathematical sequences, and story fragments projected by students. At the center, a large round table with soft lighting and cushions around it. She stepped closer. A photo lay there, half buried beneath transparent sheets. Her fingers hesitated. Then she picked it up. It was old, printed on physical paper. A rarity even by Helion standards. In it, a small girl stood in the center of a group of smiling adults. Her black hair tied into twin knots, eyes bright with recognition of the moment. The label in the bottom corner read, Elyra, year 2303. She couldn't breathe. "No," she whispered, but her voice cracked. "This can't be." She remembered nothing. Not the people, not the place, not the picture. Behind her, Riven had gone still. His gaze sharpened, not in disbelief, but in realization. "Someone wanted you to find this," he said. "They left it out, in the open. That's not accident. That's invitation." Elyra felt heat rising in her chest, confusion, fear, something buried waking up. "But why erase my memory?" Riven's voice was lower now, almost reluctant. "Maybe they didn't. Maybe you did." She held the photo tightly as if it would vanish. This wasn't just a forgotten childhood. It was an engineered silence, a missing piece returning on cue. The walls of Helion 9 had not simply witnessed history. They had curated it for her. The neuro-echo pulsed again, but this time Elyra didn't hesitate. Her fingers hovered above the synchronization module embedded in the console's base. Its core, a transparent dome, flickering with strands of neural code, still warm with preserved intent. "This interface is not just playback," she said aloud, her voice taut. "It's designed for integration, real-time memory sync." Riven shifted slightly behind her. "That's not what it was built for," he warned. "These things, they bypass defense mechanisms. It could fracture you if something doesn't align." Elyra didn't turn to him. "Maybe it needs to fracture me." Her fingers sank into the harness pad as the machine came to life, thin cords latching onto her temples with chilling precision. There was a brief moment of static, then impact. Not pain, not vision, but immersion. Darkness turned to warmth. Artificial sky overhead, the laughter of adults, the scent of hydroponic flowers. She was small, light, running barefoot across a synthetic grass courtyard. A man lifted her, her father, twirling her midair as others clapped softly in the background. No uniforms, no weapons, just people, at peace. The images began to sharpen, meetings held in candlelit rooms, not from lack of technology but out of principle. Elyra Sorn speaking to a room of leaders, engineers, doctors, artists, declaring the final phase. "We will die tonight," he said, "on every system, every network, every record. We will vanish." But it was not suicide. It was simulation. They were faking a collapse, erasing their digital selves, reprogramming probes to report falsified data. Elyra stood in the room, a child too young to grasp logistics but old enough to recognize the gravity. She saw the adults nod. Not one hesitated. They weren't dying. They were rewriting their ontology. The planners were precise. Redundant systems were sabotaged methodically to mirror destruction. Internal AI were looped into silence. All traces of communication scrubbed with self-mutating encryption. Elyra watched herself, only 7 years old, press her palm to a console. A key, her key. She had activated the final veil, and they had trusted her to do it. Why me? Her present self whispered, trembling. Because she was the bridge, the child of Callan, the only person born within Helion who still carried dual citizenship with the outside world. She was never just a resident. She was the community's memory carrier. Then came the final image. Her father kneeling before her in a softly lit room, his hands placed gently on her head. "You will forget," he said, voice tender but absolute. "And if you return, it will be because you're ready to remember." Elyra's eyes, young and wide, blinked back silent tears. "But what if I never come back?" she asked. Callan smiled sadly. "Then we will remain what we chose to be." Silent. The sync ended abruptly. Elyra gasped, body jolting as if surfacing from deep water. Her cheeks were wet. Riven stood close now, hands ready to intervene but never reaching. "Did you see?" he asked. She nodded slowly. Her voice broke on the answer. "I was part of it, all along." The truth wasn't outside her. It had always been buried inside, wrapped in layers of innocence and protection. And now that it was unlocked, she knew one thing with terrifying clarity. What she did next would matter more than everything that had come before. The silence between them thickened after the memory sync. Elyra sat still on the cold bench near the console bay, hands clenched tightly around the photo she had found earlier. Riven stood by the door, his profile lit by the faint glow of inert control panels. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I was here," he said. His voice was rougher than usual, like it had scraped itself on the way out. "Not long after they vanished, my unit, Recon Black Echo, we were ordered to confirm the extinction of Helion 9. They told us it was a rogue cell, dangerous, potentially infectious." Elyra slowly turned to him, eyes unreadable. "You were one of them." He nodded. "We breached, but when we arrived there was no resistance. No cries, no blood, just stillness. We walked these same halls. The rift shimmered the same way. But every person was gone, except one." He finally looked at her now, and his voice dropped into something softer. "You. You were the only one left. A child in a white tunic, standing in the middle of a biodome garden, holding a flower like it was armor." Elyra's lips parted. Her voice trembled. "You saw me. I was supposed to report you, extract or eliminate, but something in your face. It was like watching someone who had already chosen peace. I couldn't do it." He exhaled sharply, eyes dark. "I sedated you, falsified your biometric reading, sent a blank status report, and I ran." She stared at him, jaw tight, emotions flaring across her face in waves. Disbelief, recognition, anger, confusion. "You've known this whole time?" "Not all," he said quickly. "I suspected. When I saw your name on the escort manifest 20 years later, I knew, but I didn't want to lead your memory. I didn't know how much you'd recall on your own." Elyra stood now, the photo trembling in her grasp. "You could have told me the truth, at any point." "And risk shifting your path before you chose it?" he asked. "I owed you silence, Elyra, until you were ready." They stood in the dimness, the ghost of a long-buried past uncoiling between them. She turned away first, voice low and fragile. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Riven didn't move. "I didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding." 20. Outside the chamber, the hull of Helion creaked softly, as if exhaling centuries. The time had come for a decision neither of them wanted to face. Elyra turned to the main console. With a single command, she could transmit the restored logs, proof of Helion's choice, her father's innocence, and the truth behind the great vanishing. "If I send this," she said, "he'll be a hero again." Riven stepped beside her. "And Helion will be dissected, studied, maybe weaponized." She looked at him. "But if I don't?" No one will ever know what they built here. Maybe that's the point, Riven replied. Maybe their greatest legacy was not being remembered. The question hung between them like a wire stretched to breaking. Was the world ready for a truth it once chose to erase? And more importantly, did it deserve it? The signal came unexpectedly. Elyra was scanning Helion's central comms array, more out of habit than hope, when she noticed a dormant frequency embedded deep beneath the outer transceiver code. It pulsed once, faint but unmistakable, like a heartbeat beneath layers of encryption. "There's still a live channel," she muttered. "How is that possible?" Riven looked over, eyes narrowing. "That shouldn't be there. Every uplink was supposed to be hard isolated during the Vanish protocol." "Exactly," Elyra replied, her fingers already working through the input layers. "But someone left this one open. Deep subband, low bandwidth, manual activation only. No automation. No beacon." Riven approached slowly, arms crossed. "You think it was your father?" She shook her head. "No, this isn't Callan's signature. He would have closed everything. He believed in total silence." She paused, brows drawn tight. "But this, it's intentional. Like someone wanted this door left slightly ajar." Riven said nothing, but his posture stiffened. Elyra leaned back from the console. "It could be a failsafe. Or bait," Riven added. The word hung in the air. Was this a final contingency or a test? As the link shimmered with latent potential, Elyra stood still, facing the console that could change everything. One transmission, that's all it would take. The truth, Callan's decision, Helion's isolation, the entire recorded legacy of a society that refused war could be reinserted into history. Not as myth, as proof. Her fingers hovered just above the send key. "If I release this," she said slowly, "everything changes. The Terran archive will have to rewrite 3 decades of records. They'll question every disappearance since. And dig into every other place that ever went silent," Riven added. "They'll turn Helion into a case study, a model, or a warning." She hesitated. "But if I don't, then it's just us, just memory." "Then the question is," she whispered, "what's this really for, justice? Or closure?" The line between them blurred. Did she want redemption for her father? Or for herself? For not remembering? For needing to know? Was truth inherently sacred? Or just another form of conquest? She looked at Riven. "What would you do?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, with an edge of gentleness unfamiliar to his usual tone, he said, "I'm not the one who was left behind. Or who came back. That was always going to be you." He stepped back. "You don't need advice, Elyra. You need silence long enough to hear yourself." For a moment she resented him, for placing the weight entirely on her shoulders. But there was something in his stillness, an unspoken echo of past orders obeyed and regretted, that made his silence more honest than words. She closed her eyes. The console waited. The channel waited. But in the end, the decision would not come from data or justice or logic. It would come from trust in herself. The chamber that housed the final archive was round and dark, its walls seamless and metallic, as if grown rather than constructed. At the center stood a single pillar of light, humming quietly. No interface, no screens, just presence. Elyra approached slowly, her breath shallow, pulse rising in her ears. The room responded to her proximity, and with a soft pulse, the light fractured into strands, weaving into the image of a man. Not entirely solid, not fully spectral, he appeared like a memory being projected into physical form. Elyra Sorn, but not quite. His face was younger than she remembered, lines softened, voice calmer. "Elyra," the figure said, eyes locking onto hers with a weight that nearly buckled her knees. "You made it back." She stood there, frozen. "You're not him," she whispered. "Not really." The figure smiled gently. "No, but I am what he chose to leave behind." It identified itself as Callan Echo, a construct formed from Elyra Sorn's cognitive map, embedded with every memory, thought pattern, and core conviction he held up until the moment of the vanishing. Elyra stepped closer. "Why didn't he tell anyone he did this?" Because this wasn't meant to be found by anyone, Callan Echo replied. Except you. His tone was not rehearsed. It was intimate, designed for her. That realization stung deeper than she expected. Elyra's voice faltered. Am I speaking to my father, or just a well-coded simulation of guilt and conviction? The echo tilted its head. Does it matter if what I say still moves you? She didn't answer. Instead, she asked the question burning inside her. Why? Why did you all disappear? The echo's face turned solemn. Because humanity is trapped in its own reflection. We built Helion to step outside that mirror, not to escape, but to reframe existence. We didn't run. We refused to repeat. The words hung heavy in the stillness. We didn't want to be remembered. We wanted to prove that memory isn't the only way to preserve meaning. To redefine existence, he continued, meant breaking the contract of history. To live without hierarchy, without war, without being someone's future cautionary tale. Elyra's throat tightened. But that contract comes with isolation. So does truth, Callan Echo answered simply. And yet we found clarity here. Not perfection, but peace. That's what we protected. She wanted to argue, wanted to point out the world outside that kept burning, kept destroying itself while Helion slept in silence. But she couldn't, because she knew he was right, or rather they were. A truth too incompatible with civilization to be accepted, a model too selfless to be replicated. Callan Echo took a step forward. Now the rift will close soon. This chamber and all it holds will fold into that forgetting. But you, Elyra, you can choose otherwise. He extended a hand not to touch, but to invite. You may stay, or you may leave. She felt her heart tighten. Was this a metaphor, or literal? Had the echo been left to test her choice, or to fulfill it? Her voice was barely audible. And if I stay? Then you become one with the silence, he said. And if I leave? Then you carry us back into noise. No instructions, no judgment, just a gate. Elyra stared into the flickering face of a man she once called father. Was she his continuation or his conclusion? It was in the secondary system logs, not in the mainframe, but embedded in a maintenance module tucked deep within the structural matrix. Elyra accessed it only by chance, or perhaps by design. The file was dated 2303-12-14, tagged with a secure cipher. She decrypted it using a sequence her hands seemed to recall before her mind did. What she found rendered her breathless. A hollow recording flickered to life. Grainy, low-res, but unmistakable. A girl, no older than 8, with amber eyes and a white tunic, stood before the master control pillar in Helion's core. Around her, a group of silent adults observed, their faces serene. Then, with small, deliberate hands, the girl inserted a memory chip into the neural vault. Elyra stared at her own childhood face. She had activated the veil. She had sealed Helion from history. She had been entrusted with the key. Why her? She rewound the footage again and again, searching the eyes of those around the child. There was no fear, no doubt, only reverence. The question clawed at her. Who had taught her such precision? How had an 8-year-old been capable of synchronizing biological encryption with Helion's most complex neuroconstruct? Then the answer came in layers, recalled not from files but from within. A teacher with soft hands, a counselor who spoke in riddles, a father who gave her puzzles not to solve, but to embody. The entire community had prepared her, not to understand, but to carry. She hadn't been chosen at random. She was the vessel, the lock and the key. Helion's disappearance was not a vanishing act. It was a planting, and Elyra was the seed. Images surged from her recovered memory, hands resting on her shoulders, voices whispering stories not meant to be remembered until they were needed. She saw again the garden under the artificial dome, the songs, the books without titles, the way adults knelt when speaking to her, not out of condescension, but respect. They had made her more than a child. They had made her the witness, the one who would one day return. But was that right? To shape a person into a carrier of collective silence? Was it ethical to embed within her not just memories, but responsibility? She had not been given a choice. And yet now, She held all the choice. Behind her, Riven's voice came low and strained. I remember that moment, he said. When we entered Helion, the place looked abandoned, lifeless. But then, we reached the central atrium, and they were there, just standing, looking at us. He paused. No fear, no weapons, just presence. Elyra turned to face him, her breath caught in her throat. What did you do? Riven's eyes darkened. Nothing. I froze. Everyone did. We weren't prepared for that kind of silence. It was like staring at a truth so massive it erased the need to speak. He swallowed hard. Then the veil activated. The station shimmered, and they were gone, like stepping through a page mid-sentence. No alarms, no footprints. Just absence. She understood then. He didn't retreat out of mercy. He had fled out of awe. So, she asked, voice barely audible, do you believe they're still alive? Riven didn't answer immediately. His eyes searched the shimmering walls as if trying to see through them. Not here, he finally said, but somewhere, somewhen. Elyra stood in the center of the control room, surrounded by echoes of a past she now remembered and a future she had yet to choose. The people of Helion hadn't died. They had stepped out of time, out of sight, leaving her behind as the last visible thread. She no longer doubted they were watching. The silence in Helion grew heavier with each passing hour. No automated systems came online. No latent AIs awoke. No alarms, no coded whispers through auxiliary bands. Just silence, a kind too deliberate to be neglect, too still to be absence. Elyra stood at the observation deck, watching the rift pulse faintly in the distance like a dying heartbeat. She had kept the transmission link dormant. For now. Helion had not sent a distress call in over 68 years. It had not sent anything. It simply was. A monument to a decision no one had been meant to understand. She began to wonder, could any community endure so long in perfect isolation, without new voices, without challenge, without evolution? Was the stillness inside this place an echo of endurance or of entropy? And yet, maybe that was the message. Maybe the silence was the message. Not a cry for help, not a hidden signal buried in code, but the act of silence itself, a refusal to engage, a final, peaceful rejection of the world outside. Helion wasn't asking to be found. It was allowing someone, just one, to witness. Elyra was no longer sure if she was meant to report back, or simply to understand. She began to walk. No agenda, no data scan, just motion. She visited the quarters left behind, the garden under the main dome, the educational commons still humming faintly with preserved projection energy. In one room, a toy sat on a neatly folded blanket. In another, a journal entry had been etched into the wall using stylus ink. Today we voted to vanish. Tomorrow we will begin forgetting. Every item spoke of routine, of softness, of people who were not fleeing in fear, but walking into silence with grace. She paused in the dining chamber, where communal bowls still sat atop a stone-textured table. Dustless, preserved. Elyra touched the edge and closed her eyes. There was a kind of reverence in this ritual, like walking through a mausoleum where the dead had never died, only departed beyond comprehension. Riven followed her, but never intruded. His boots echoed once for every three of hers, always behind, always watching. He did not speak. It was clear now. He wasn't guarding her. He was witnessing her. Maybe he understood her better than she realized. Maybe he wasn't waiting for a command or a crisis, but for her, for Elyra to finish this journey through memory and silence, to arrive at the place where choice could be made with clarity, not burden. He stood near the threshold as she entered the final room, a gallery of personal effects curated like sacred objects. A cracked glasses frame, a child's handprint in polymer clay, a list of shared meals on a translucent slate. Not a museum, a memory. Elyra looked back at him, and he met her gaze. She didn't need to speak, because perhaps in that long, unspoken walk through the remains of a vanished world, he had also begun to understand what it meant to forgive. Not just her, or Helion, but himself. And forgiveness, too, can be silent. The cartographic chamber lay hidden behind a sealed hatch near the lower ring, untouched by decay, yet sealed by redundancy. When Elyra decrypted its locks using her restored clearance, the room came alive in a slow pulse of star maps, gravitational data, and extrapolated coordinates. Helion 9 had not been stationary. Prior to the vanishing, its inhabitants had calculated routes beyond the rift, not for trade, not for return, but for departure. Multiple projections indicated trajectories leading away from the trinary system. Not escape routes, but long-term vectors aimed at habitable zones outside Terran influence. One record stood out. An unnamed Class M candidate, 4.2 light-years beyond the rift's border. No name, no signal. Just a ghost marker tagged Phase Omega. Elyra stared at it for a long time. "They left," she whispered. "They used this place to disappear, and then moved on." She turned slowly, eyes scanning the quiet room. Helion 9 is just the echo. Had the entire community migrated to a new world? If so, what remained here was not a home, but a hollow, a final monument left behind for memory's sake. It changed everything. They had not only chosen silence, they had chosen continuity beyond witness. Without comms, without history, just life. But what was such a life? Without records, names, or acknowledgments, did it exist in the eyes of the cosmos? Were they now myth, or had they truly transcended the need to be seen at all? She found it etched faintly, just above the navigation node. "Not all lights wish to be seen." The phrase repeated again on multiple panels, coded into navigation logs, scrawled in the corner of a child's drawing, whispered across layers of metadata like a quiet mantra. A message or a warning? Elyra leaned her forehead against the console. The phrase wasn't about shame. It was about choice. Visibility was not always a virtue. Not all illumination was welcome. Some lights burned only for the ones who lived within them. Had they meant for her to find this? Was she still following their trail, or merely trespassing on a goodbye? The weight pressed harder than before. If she published the findings, the entire Terran record would be upended. Her father's name cleared, yes, but Helion's people, now possibly thriving in anonymity, would be forced back into the light. And for what? A monument? A textbook? A medal given too late? The ideals she had grown up believing, truth, justice, historical clarity, now felt brittle, conditional. She began to ask herself questions that once would have seemed blasphemous. Was truth always worth the price? Was justice, delayed by decades, still justice if it disturbed a deliberate peace? More deeply, she wondered if memory itself could become a kind of violence. If to remember against someone's will was a subtle betrayal, if to dig up the past, no matter how noble, was to desecrate something sacred. The rift outside still shimmered like liquid glass, and within her, the line between right and righteous blurred. She was the keeper now, of their silence, of their light. And not all lights wished to be seen. Elyra sat alone in the recording alcove, the faint light of Helion's interior reflecting off the polished surface of the console. She had activated the voice log recorder an hour ago, and for that entire hour she had spoken slowly, carefully, no embellishment, no dramatics, just truth as it had unfolded. She detailed the discovery of the neuroecho, the realization of her childhood role, the migration plans, the unbroken silence, the whispered phrase that repeated like a litany. Not all lights wish to be seen. Her voice was even, reflective, neither seeking pity nor glory. But when she reached the end, when her hand hovered above the final send command, something inside her clenched. Her finger withdrew. She leaned back. The log would be stored, yes, but not transmitted. She asked herself the question plainly. Was I speaking for history or for myself? The answer, though unspoken, lay in the weight in her chest. Some truths were meant to be held, not delivered. Because truth, even when unshared, still shaped those who carried it. Riven found her in the main corridor shortly after. He held something in his hand, small, metallic, time-worn. He said nothing as he placed it in her palm. A badge, round, bronze-tinted, its edges smoothed by decades of wear. The insignia was unmistakable, Helion 9 with its concentric rings of silence. Elyra looked at him in surprise. "Where did you get this?" His eyes were darker than usual. "A woman," he said simply. "One of the few I encountered during the operation. She didn't run. She walked up to me, looked me in the eye, and pressed it into my hand. No words." Elyra examined the badge more closely. There was something intimate in its wornness, as if it had never been displayed, only held. "Why you?" she asked. Riven shrugged, but his voice held weight. "Maybe she saw something I didn't back then. Or maybe she just wanted one soldier to remember, without needing to speak." She closed her hand around the badge. It was heavier than it looked. Not in mass, but in meaning. A gift given not to instruct, but to remind. That sometimes silence was not forgetting. It was choosing what to remember. Together, they stood at the observation deck as the rift began to close. The shimmer that had hovered beyond the station like a soft curtain was now tightening, folding inward, the strange bend in time and space knitting itself shut. Soon Helion 9 would be completely inaccessible again, both physically and chronologically. Elyra watched its light dim and knew. This would be the last time. There would be no return. "I used to think living meant leaving a mark," she said quietly. "Making noise. Writing something down so it couldn't be erased." Riven didn't respond. He just watched the rift, as if saying goodbye to ghosts. "But maybe," she continued, "living means choosing what not to leave behind." He looked at her. "If someone asks you what happened here, what will you say?" She held up the badge for a moment, then tucked it into her jacket. That the station was empty, that nothing remained, that silence was all we found. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Just the kind of truth that lives only in those who carry it. The central data uplink stood like an altar in the heart of Helion 9. It had no grand architecture, no pulsating lights or animated interfaces, just a flat, matte silver pedestal with one glowing key: transmit. Elyra stood before it, arms slack at her sides, the air around her still in charge. All she had to do was press her hand to the panel. In an instant, the recorded memories, the system logs, the coordinates of the nameless planet, and every encrypted fragment of Elyra Sorn's voice would transmit to the remaining Terran networks still scanning beyond the rift. The world would know. Her father would be vindicated, the lie erased, the silence broken. But at what cost? Elyra could already see it, the headlines, the analysts, the councils scrambling to interpret Helion's legacy. Speculation, deconstruction, appropriation. The echo of a society that had chosen peace, dissected and filtered through bureaucracies that had never understood what it meant to stop fighting. Helion would become a theory, a tool, a controversy. Her father's name would be cleared, yes, but at the price of dragging the vanished into the very noise they had died to escape. Was this justice or desecration? Her hand hovered over the panel. The glow reflected faintly in her pupils. Her pulse steadied. In this moment, alone but watched by memories, she asked herself a final question. Was this choice for them or for her? She stepped back. Her fingers moved instead to the master power node. A different option: terminate. A prompt appeared requiring biometric verification. She placed her hand without hesitation. The console dimmed. The glow flickered once, then faded into black. Elyra reached into the side console, opened a secured case, and removed the last data crystal, containing a mirrored backup of the neuroecho. She studied it for a long second. Then she crushed it. The sound was small, barely audible, a delicate shattering like ice in warm water. With it, the final digital thread to Helion's truth was erased. She exhaled, slow and quiet. This wasn't an act of denial. It was permission. Permission for the vanished to remain where they had chosen to be. Beyond reach, beyond interpretation, beyond history. They had not asked to be remembered, and she finally understood that remembering them against their will was not reverence, it was violation. Riven stepped forward from the shadows, watching as the dust of shattered memory fell through her fingers. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he smiled. It was a subtle smile, worn and small, the kind that doesn't come from joy but from relief. Not a celebration, a release. The first time his expression had softened since they arrived. She returned the look, something unspoken passing between them. It was done. They would not leave with trophies or truths. They would leave with the only thing Helion had ever truly offered: silence. A silence not born of fear, but of choice. And in that silence, they carried something far heavier than proof. They carried respect. The docking hatch of the Warden closed with a gentle hiss, sealing out the air of Helion 9 for the last time. Elyra didn't look back. Neither did Riven. Behind them, the vast station loomed silent, motionless, veiled in temporal shimmer as the final sequence of rift compression began. In 13 minutes, the spatial corridor leading to Helion would collapse entirely, folding the station into a gravitational seam that no navigational grid would be able to find again. It would vanish, not with thunder, but with silence, just as it always had intended. Inside the ship, Elyra sat in the co-pilot seat, arms resting loosely in her lap, the badge from Riven tucked inside her jacket. She carried no data drives, no records, no proof of what they had seen. There would be no restoration of her father's name, no debates in Terran courtrooms, no medals pinned posthumously, just silence, just choice. "How do you live?" she asked softly, with a truth no one will ever hear. Riven, already initiating the ignition cycle, kept his eyes on the panel. "You don't live for the truth," he said. "You live with it, quietly, like a scar no one sees." "Will they believe us if we ever told them?" she asked. "Probably not," he replied. "But maybe that's not the point." She nodded, more to herself than to him. They weren't leaving with credibility. They were leaving with integrity. Outside the viewport, the rift began to contract. The gravitational lens shimmered like water being pulled into a drain. Helion 9 flickered, once, twice, then folded inward in a bloom of silent light. And then it was gone. No debris, no signal, no shadow. "Gone," Riven whispered. But Elyra wasn't sure. In her mind, Helion still existed, like a breath held between heartbeats. Was it a home, a memory, or simply a place where people had chosen peace in a world allergic to stillness? She didn't know. All she knew was that its end didn't feel like erasure. It felt like completion. Some stories do not need monuments. Some endings do not need to be recorded to be real. And perhaps, she thought, some silences sing louder than all the songs written in their place. Before they left orbit, Elyra accessed her personal log and recorded a single final entry, not to transmit, but to archive. Not every truth must be preserved, but everyone deserves the right to choose how they disappear. She didn't address it to anyone in particular, yet it echoed with 3 names: Callan, Riven, herself. Maybe history was never what was written down, but what was allowed to be remembered. And maybe, just maybe, a single person holding memory with care could carry the weight of an entire civilization. As the stars realigned outside the viewport and the Warden slipped silently into FTL departure, Elyra closed her eyes not to forget, but to keep what should never be told. As the stars stretched into silence and the rift faded from every known chart, Elyra sat still in the Warden, the last keeper of a truth no longer bound to be spoken. Helion was gone, not lost, not destroyed, but chosen to be forgotten. She carried no relic, no proof, only memory. And in that memory, peace endured. Some truths are not meant to be revealed. Some goodbyes are not meant to echo. As the ship slipped into deep drift, Elyra closed her eyes not to grieve, but to honor. For in a universe that constantly demands noise, her choice was the rarest kind of defiance. Silence not as surrender, but as sovereignty. And with that she vanished too, not into history, but into a promise, that not all lights wish to be seen, and not every ending needs to be told.